deportation of the 3,000 to 4,000 Jews from UK6W began the next morning, November 7th, an operation that continued for several days. 31. No longer in any doubt about their fate, the Jews sang, "We are traveling to Treblinka," as they were marched away. In retaliation for the failure of the Jewish ghetto police to report hidden Jews, the Order Police carried out a shooting of 40 to 50 Jews. 32. During this final deportation, many Jews had apparently been hiding tenaciously. After the trains left, the security police employed a ruse to lure the surviving Jews from their concealment. It was announced throughout the ghetto that new identity cards would be issued. Anyone who reported for his card would be spared. Anyone found without one would be shot immediately. Hoping at least for another brief respite between deportations, desperate Jews emerged from their hiding places and reported. After at least 200 Jews had been collected, they were marched outside UK6W and shot on November 11th. Another group was collected and shot on November 14th. 33 members of Reserve Police Battalion 101 were caught up in at least one, if not both, of these final shootings. Because Trapp and the bulk of 1st Company were apparently elsewhere, Buchman was temporarily without his protector. He and virtually every available man on the battalion staff, clerks, communications men, and drivers who had hitherto avoided direct participation in mass executions suddenly found themselves pressed into service by the local security police. In contrast to the blurred recollections of those who, by autumn, were jaded veterans of many Jewish actions, the memories of shooting Jews in UK6W were quite vivid for these initiates. 34. One policeman recalled that word of an imminent shooting action had already spread the night before. On this evening, an entertainment unit of Berlin police, so-called Welfare for the Front, was our guest. This entertainment unit consisted of musicians and performers. The members of this unit had likewise heard of the pending shooting of the Jews. They asked, indeed even emphatically begged, to be allowed to participate in the execution of the Jews. This request was granted by the battalion. 35. The following morning, Buchman returned from a meeting and led his men to the security police building near the entrance to the ghetto. The policemen took up guard posts along both sides of the street. The iron gate of the ghetto opened and several hundred Jews were driven out. The policemen marched them out of town. 36 more guards were needed for yet another column of Jews. Members of the battalion staff were thereupon ordered to report to security police headquarters. A few days earlier, they had watched from the windows of the school that had been turned into their lodgings, as the Jews of LUK6W were marched past on the way to the train station. Now it was their turn to take part. They received a contingent of 50 to 100 Jews from the security police and followed the same route out of town. 37. Meanwhile, the first column had turned off the road and followed a path to an open meadow of sandy soil. A SS officer called a halt and told Buchman's deputy, Hans Protzmann, to begin shooting the Jews. Protzmann formed a firing squad of 15 to 25 men, primarily volunteers from the entertainment unit who had been equipped with guns by the battalion. The Jews had to undress the men entirely and the women down to their underclothing. They placed their shoes and clothing on a pile and were led off in groups to the execution spot some 50 meters away. Here they lay face down and, as usual, were shot from behind by policemen using fixed bayonets as aiming guides. Buchman stood nearby with several SS Offi 38ers. When the men from the battalion staff reached the sandy meadow, the shooting was already underway. Buchman approached and told them that they had to provide a firing squad to shoot the Jews they had brought with them. One staff clerk in charge of uniforms asked to be let out, because there were children among the Jews we had brought, and at the time I myself was a father with a family of 3 children. I told the lieutenant something to the effect that I was unable to shoot and asked if he couldn't assign me to something else. Several others immediately made the same request. 39. Buchman thus found himself in the same position as Trapp at J6ZEF6W and basically reacted in the same way. Ordered directly by superior SS officers of the security police to carry out a mass shooting of Jews with the Order Police under his command, Buchman complied. Faced with subordinates, who explicitly requested a different assignment, just as he had done at J6ZEF6W, Buchman consented and excused 4 men. As the shooting continued, Buchman removed himself. In the company of the senior member of the staff contingent, a man whom he knew well, and had excused from the firing squad, upon request, he walked a considerable distance from the execution site. Sometime later, communications men and drivers from the battalion staff were ordered to take part in another shooting of Jews, collected by the security police, in UK6W. This time Buchman was not present for his numerous requests for a recall to Hamburg had finally been granted. Upon his return he first took a position as an air defense officer. Between January and August 1943, he served as adjutant to the police president of Hamburg. He was then allowed to return to his lumber firm, whose business took him to France, Austria, and Czechoslovakia during the last years of the war. Just prior to his release from the Order Police, he had been promoted to the rank of Reserve First Lieutenant 41. Clearly, Trapp had not only protected him from Jewish actions in Poland with the exception of the LUK-6W shooting, but also ensured that his personnel file contained a very positive evaluation that in no way damaged his career. The strange health of Captain Hoffman, until the fall of 1942, 3rd Company of Reserve Police Battalion 101, under Captain and SS Hauptsturmführer Wolfgang Hoffman, had led a charmed existence, largely spared from the killing that was becoming the predominant activity of the other units in the battalion. At J6ZEF6W, 2 platoons of 3rd Company had initially been assigned to the outer cordon, and none of its members had been sent to the firing squads in the woods. When the battalion was transferred to the Northern Security Zone in the Lublin district, 2nd and 3rd platoons of 3rd Company were stationed in the county of Puyi. 3rd Platoon was stationed in the town of Puyi itself, under Hoffman's direct command, and Lieutenant Hoppner's 2nd Platoon nearby, first in KUR-6W and then in Wandlin. In the county of Puyi, the bulk of the Jewish population had already been deported to SOBIB-6R in May 1942, the first Jews to be killed in that camp, and the remnants of the region's Jewish population were concentrated in a collection ghetto in the small town of Konskaola, about 6 kilometers east of Puyi. Thus only Lieutenant Peters's 1st Platoon, stationed in the neighboring county of Rajzai, had been involved in the August deportations and late September shootings, nor did the Polish resistance initially disturb 3rd Company's sojourn in Puyi. Hoffman later reported that they had found the county relatively quiet and that before October not a single encounter with armed bandits had taken place. One in early October, however, 3rd Company's luck ran out. The collection ghetto at Konskaola, containing some 1,500 to 2,000 Jews, too was scheduled to be cleared, like the ghettos in neighboring Rajiri. Northern Lublin was to be Juden for. A considerable force was assembled for the task. All 3 platoons of 3rd Company, including Peters's, from Chemierniki. The local gendarmerie post of some 12 men, under 1st Lieutenant Jammer *, whose main task was to supervise the work of the local Polish police, a roving motorized company of gendarmerie under 1st Lieutenant Messman *, and about 100 HUS and 3 SS men from Lublin 3rd Company, assembled in Puyi, where Hoffman read his instructions from a piece of paper. The ghetto was to be combed, and the Jews collected in the marketplace. Those who could not move, the old, frail, and sick as well as infants, were to be shot on the spot. This had been standard procedure, he added, for quite some time, for the policemen drove to Konskaola. Hoffman, the senior police officer present, consulted with Jammer and Messman, and distributed the men. In contrast to the usual practice, the HUS were assigned to the cordon, along with some of the police. The search commandos, who initially entered the ghetto, were composed of men from both 3rd Company and Messman's motorized gendarmerie. Each commando was assigned a particular block of houses 5. The ghetto had been afflicted by an epidemic of dysentery, and many of the Jews could not walk to the marketplace, or even rise from their beds. Thus shooting was heard everywhere, as the commandos conducted their first sweep through the ghetto. One policeman recalled, "I myself shot 6 old people in the dwellings. They were bedridden people, who explicitly asked me to do it." After the first sweep was completed, and most of the surviving Jews were collected at the marketplace, the units assigned to the cordon were called in to carry out a search of the ghetto. They had heard the continuous shooting already. As they searched the ghetto, they encountered corpses strewn everywhere. Many of the men remembered in particular the building that had served as the ghetto hospital, in fact nothing more than a large room, filled with 3 or 4 levels of bunk beds and emitting a terrible stench. A group of 5 or 6 policemen was assigned to enter the room and liquidate the 40 or 50 patients, most of whom were suffering from dysentery. In any case, almost all of them were extremely emaciated and totally undernourished. One could say they consisted of nothing but skin and bones, no doubt hoping to escape the smell as quickly as possible. The policemen opened fire wildly as soon as they entered the room. Under the hail of bullets, bodies toppled from the upper bunks. This way of proceeding so disgusted me, and I was so ashamed, that I immediately turned around and left the room, reported one policeman. 9 Another remembered, at the sight of the sick, it was not possible for me to shoot at one of the Jews, and I intentionally aimed all my shots wide. His sergeant, who had joined in the shooting, noticed his marksmanship, for after the conclusion of the action, he took me aside and reviled me as a traitor and coward, and threatened to report the incident to Captain Hoffman. However, he did not do that. 10 At the marketplace, the Jews were separated, men on one side, women and children on the other. There was a selection of men, between 18 and 45, particularly skilled workers. Possibly some women were selected for work, as well. These Jews were marched out of the ghetto, to the train station outside Puyi, to be shipped to work camps in Lublin. They were in such a weakened condition that many could not make the 5-kilometer march to the train station. Witnesses estimated that 500 to 1,000 Jews were selected for labor, but 100 were shot en route after collapsing from exhaustion. 11 As the Jews deemed suitable for work were marched out of town. The remaining Jews, 800 to 1,000 women and children, as well as a large number of elderly men, were simultaneously led off to a shooting site in a woods beyond the edge of town. Peters's 1st platoon and some of Messman's gendarmerie supplied the firing squads. First, the Jewish men were taken into the woods, forced to lie face down, and shot. The women and children followed. 12 One of the policemen chatted with the head of the Jewish council, a German Jew from Munich, until he too was led away at the end. 13 When the policemen, who had escorted the work Jews to the train station, returned to the marketplace in Konskaola, they found it empty, but they could hear shooting from the woods. They were assigned to make one more sweep through the ghetto, after which they were allowed to break ranks and relax. By then it was late afternoon, and some of the men found a pleasant farmhouse and played cards. 25 years later, Wolfgang Hoffmann claimed to remember absolutely nothing of the Konskaola action, in which 1,100 to 1,600 Jews had been killed in a single day by policemen under his command. His amnesia may have been grounded not only in judicial expediency, but also in the health problems he was experiencing during his assignment in Puyi. At the time, Hoffmann blamed his illness on a dysentery vaccine that he had taken in late August. In the 1960s, he found it more convenient to trace his illness to the psychological stress of the J6ZEF6W massacre. 15 Whatever the cause, Hoffmann began to suffer from diarrhea and severe stomach cramps in September and October 1942. By his own account, his condition, diagnosed as vegetative colitis, was terribly aggravated by bumpy movement, as on a bicycle or in a car, and thus he personally led few of his company's actions at this time. Nonetheless, out of soldierly enthusiasm and the hope of improvement, he refused to report his illness until the end of October. Only on November 2nd did he enter the army hospital on doctor's orders. Uniformly, Hoffmann's men offered a different perspective. By their observation, his alleged bouts of stomach cramps, confining him safely to bed, coincided all too consistently with company actions that might involve either unpleasantness or danger. It became common for the men to predict, upon hearing the night before of a pending action, that the company chief would be bedridden by morning. Hoffmann's behavior rankled his men even more because of two aggravating factors. First, he had always been strict and unapproachable, a typical base officer who liked his white collar and gloves, wore his SS insignia on his uniform, and demanded considerable deference. His apparent timidity in the face of action now seemed the height of hypocrisy, and they derided him as a pimp, the term for a member of the 10 to 14-year-old age group of the Hitler Youth, in effect a Hitler Cub Scout. Second, Hoffman tried to compensate for his immobility by intensified supervision of his subordinates. He insisted on giving orders for everything from his bed to all intents functioning not only as company commander, but as platoon commander as well. Before every patrol or action, the non-commissioned officers reported to Hoffman's bedroom for detailed instructions, and afterward they reported to him personally again. Third platoon, stationed in Putai, had no lieutenant and was led by the senior sergeant, Justman. He in particular was allowed to make no disposition of men without Hoffman's approval. Justman and the other sergeants felt they had been demoted to the rank of corporal. 16. Hoffman was hospitalized in Putai from November 2 to November 25. He then returned to Germany for convalescent leave until after New Year's. He briefly led his company again for 1 month before returning to Germany for renewed treatment. During this second leave in Germany, Hoffman learned that Trapp had him relieved of his company vertical bar command. Hoffman's relations with Trapp had already soured in January when the battalion commander ordered all his officers, 1 NCOs, and men to sign a special declaration pledging not to vertical bar, steal, plunder, or take goods without paying for them. Hoffman wrote Trapp a blistering reply in which he explicitly refused to carry out this order because it deeply violated his sense of honor. 17. Trapp had also heard unflattering accounts of Hoffman's inactivity in Putsui from his temporary replacement, First Lieutenant Messman, commander of the motorized General Armory Company that had taken part in the Konskaolum massacre. Trapp consulted with First Sergeant Carlson of 3rd Company, who confirmed the pattern of Hoffman's illness. On February 23, 1943, Trapp submitted his request that Hoffman be dismissed from his post as company commander because he vertical bar always reported sick before important actions, and this deficient sense of service was not good for the morale of his men. 18. The proud, touchy Hoffman responded bitterly and energetically to his dismissal, claiming once again that his honor as an officer and soldier had been most deeply hurt. He accused Trapp of acting out of personal spite. 19. Trapp responded in detail and was upheld. The commander of the Order Police for the Lublin district concluded that Hoffman's behavior had been in no way satisfactory, that if he really had been sick, he was irresponsible in not reporting according to regulations, and that he should be given an opportunity to prove himself with another. Unit 20. Hoffman was in feet transferred to a police battalion that experienced frontline action in the fall of 1943 in Russia, where he earned the Iron Cross 2nd class. He was later given command of a battalion of White Russian auxiliaries near Minsk, and then of a battalion of Caucasian volunteers. He ended the war as first staff officer for the commanding police general in Poznary. 21. In short, from his subsequent career, it would be difficult to conclude that Hoffman's behavior in the fall of 1942 was a case of cowardice, as his men and Trapp suspected. Ill he was. Whether his illness was initially caused by the murderous activities of Reserve Police Battalion 101 cannot be established, but he had the symptoms of psychologically induced irritable colon or adaptive colitis. Certainly Hoffman's duties aggravated his condition. Moreover, it is clear that rather than using his illness to escape an assignment that involved killing the Jews of Poland, Hoffman made every effort to hide it from his superiors and to avoid being hospitalized. If mass murder was giving Hoffman stomach pains, it was a fact he was deeply ashamed of and sought to overcome to the best of his ability. Vertical bar by mid-November 1942, following the massacres at Jos, Fulomazi, Sarakamla, and elsewhere, and the liquidation of the ghettos in Mijayerzyk, LUK6W, Perchurajiri, and Kok, the men of Reserve Police Battalion, 101 Head J, participated in the outright execution of at least 6,500 Polish Jews, and the deportation of at least 42,000 more to the gas chambers of Treblinka. Still, their role in the mass murder campaign was not finished. Once the towns and ghettos of the northern Lublin district had been cleared of Jews, Reserve Police Battalion 101 was assigned to track down and systematically eliminate all those who had escaped the previous roundups that were now in hiding. In short, they were responsible for making their region completely Judenfrei. 1 year earlier, on October 15, 1941, the head of the general government, Hans Frank, had decreed that any Jew caught outside ghetto boundaries was to be hauled before a special court and sentenced to death. This decree was at least partly in response to the pleas of German public health officials in Poland, who realized that only the most draconian punishment could deter starving Jews from leaving the ghettos to smuggle food, and thereby spreading the typhus epidemic that was ravaging the ghettos. For example, the head of public health for the district of Warsaw, Dr. Lambrecht, had argued for a law threatening Jews found outside the ghetto with fear of death through hanging that was greater than fear of death through starvation. One complaint soon arose concerning the implementation of Frank's decree, however. The manpower available to escort captured Jews was too limited, the distances to be covered too great, the judicial procedures of the special courts too cumbersome and time-consuming. The remedy was simple. All judicial procedures would be dispensed with, and Jews found outside the ghettos would be shot on the spot. At a meeting between the district governors and Frank on December 16, 1941, the deputy to the governor of the Warsaw district noted how gratefully one had welcomed the shooting order of the commander of the order police, whereby Jews encountered in the countryside could be shot to. In short, even before they were systematically deported to the death camps, the Jews of Poland were subject to summary execution outside the ghettos. This shooting order, however, was loosely applied in the district of Lublin, for there, in comparison to the rest of the general government, ghettoization was only partial. Jews living in the small towns and villages of northern Lublin were not concentrated in the transit ghettos of Mijayerzyk and Lukau until September and October 1942. The predecessor to Trapp's unit in the northern Lublin district, Police Battalion 306, did indeed shoot Jews encountered outside of town, on occasion 3, but the systematic tracking down of Jews did not begin until ghettoization was complete. It truly intensified only after the ghettos were liquidated. In late August, Perchu became the first ghetto in the Battalion's security zone to be completely cleared. According to Sergeant Steinmetz, whose 3rd platoon of 2nd Company was stationed there, Jews continued to be found in the area. They were incarcerated in the local prison. Nade ordered Steinmetz to shoot the imprisoned Jews. This order of Lieutenant Nade explicitly extended to all future cases, as well. I was given the task of keeping my territory free of Jews. For Lieutenant Drucker likewise remembered receiving orders from battalion headquarters in late August that Jews wandering freely about the countryside were to be shot on the spot when encountered. But until the final deportations of Jews from the small villages to the transit ghettos, the order was not fully implemented. By October, the order was for real. 5 placards announced that all Jews who did not go to the ghettos would be shot. 6. The shooting order was made part of regular company instructions to the men and given repeatedly, especially before they were sent on patrol. 7. No one could be left in any doubt that not a single Jew was to remain alive in the battalion's security zone. In official jargon, the battalion made forest patrols for suspects. 8. As the surviving Jews were to be tracked down and shot like animals. However, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 unofficially dubbed this phase of the final solution the Judenjagd, or Jew hunt. 9. The Jew hunt took many forms. Most spectacular were 2 battalion sweeps through the Perchu forest in the fall of 1942 and the spring of 1943, the latter alongside army units. Not only Jews, but partisans and escaped Russian prisoners of war were the targets of these sweeps, though Jews seem to have been the primary victims of the first one, in October 1942. Georg Leffler *of 3rd Company recalled. We were told that there were many Jews hiding in the forest. We therefore searched through the woods in a skirmish line, but could find nothing, because the Jews were obviously well hidden. We combed the woods a second time. Only then could we discover individual chimney pipes sticking out of the earth. We discovered that Jews had hidden themselves in underground bunkers here. They were hauled out with resistance in only one bunker. Some of the comrades climbed down into this bunker and hauled the Jews out. The Jews were then shot on the spot. The Jews had to lie face down on the ground and were killed by a neck shot. Who was in the firing squad I don't remember. I think it was simply a case where the men standing nearby were ordered to shoot them. Some 50 Jews were shot, including men and women of all ages, because entire families had hidden themselves there. The shooting took place quite publicly. No cordon was formed at all for a number of Poles from Prussia standing directly by the shooting site. They were then ordered, presumably by Hoffmann, to bury the Jews who had been shot in a half-finished bunker. 10 other units of the battalion also remembered discovering bunkers and killing Jews in batches of 20 to 50. 11. Policemen estimated the total body count for the October sweep at 50012. By spring, the situation had altered somewhat. The few Jews still alive had for the most part been able to join bands of partisans and escaped POWs. The spring sweep uncovered a forest camp of escaped Russians and Jews who offered armed resistance. Some 100 to 120 Jews and Russians were killed. The battalion suffered at least one fatality, for Trapp's adjutant, Lieutenant Hagen, was accidentally killed by his own men. 13. A number of Jews had been sent as workers to various large agricultural estates that the German occupiers had confiscated and now administered. At Gut-Jablon, near Perchu, a unit of Steinmetz's platoon loaded the 30 Jewish workers on trucks, drove them to the forest, and killed them with the now routine neck shot. The German administrator, who had not been informed of the impending liquidation of his workforce, complained in vain. 14. The German administrator of Gut-Panwitz, near Pufai, encountered the opposite problem of too many Jewish workers. His estate became a refuge for Jews who had fled the ghettos to the nearby forest and then sought sanctuary and food among his work Jews. Whenever the Jewish worker population swelled noticeably, the estate administration phoned Captain Hoffmann, and a German police commando was sent to shoot the surplus Jews. 15. After Hoffmann's hospitalization, his successor, Lieutenant Messmann, formed a flying squadron that systematically eliminated small batches of Jewish workers in a 50 to 60 kilometer radius of Pulau. Messmann's driver, Alfred Sperlich recalled the procedure. In cases where the farmyard and the Jewish lodgings could be reached quickly, I drove into the farmyard at high speed, and the police sprang out and immediately rushed to the Jewish lodgings. Then all the Jews present at that time were driven out and shot in the farmyard, near a haystack, potato pit, or dung heap. The victims were almost always naked and were shot in the neck while lying on the ground. If the road into the farmyard was too visible, however, the police approached stealthily on foot to prevent their victims' escape. Routinely in workplaces near the woods, the police found many more Jews than expected. 16. Some Jews had survived by hiding in town rather than in the woods, but they too were tracked down. 17. The most memorable case was in Koch, where a cellar hiding place was reported by a Polish translator working for the Germans. 4 Jews were captured. Under interrogation they revealed another cellar hiding place in a large house on the edge of town. A single German policeman and the Polish translator went to the second hiding place, expecting no difficulties. But this was a rare instance, in which the Jews had arms, and the approaching policeman was bred upon. Reinforcements were summoned and a firefight broke out. In the end 4 or 5 Jews were killed in a breakout attempt, and 8 to 10 others were found dead or badly wounded in the cellar. Only 4 or 5 were captured and wounded. They were likewise interrogated and shot that evening. 18. The German police then went in search of the owner of the house, a Polish woman who had managed to flee in time. She was tracked to her father's house in a nearby village. Lieutenant Brand presented the father with a stark choice: his life or his daughter's. The man surrendered his daughter, who was shot on the spot. 19. The most common form of the Jew hunt was the small patrol into the forest to liquidate an individual bunker that had been reported. The battalion built up a network of informers and forest runners, or trackers, who searched for and revealed Jewish hiding places. Many other Poles volunteered information about Jews in the woods who had stolen food from nearby fields, farms, and villages in their desperate attempt to stay alive. Upon receiving such reports, the local police commanders dispatched small patrols to locate the hiding Jews. Time and again the same scenario was played out, with only minor variations. The policemen followed their polished guides directly to the bunker hideouts and tossed grenades in the openings. The Jews who survived the initial grenade attack and emerged from the bunkers were forced to lie face down for the next shot. The bodies were routinely left to be buried by the nearest Polish villagers. 20. These patrols were too frequent for most policemen to remember how many they had participated in. It was more or less our daily bread, said 121. The expression daily bread was applied to the Jew hunts by another policeman as well. 22. From the behavior of the patrol leaders, the men could quickly tell if they faced potential partisan action, or were simply searching for reported Jews who were assumed to be unarmed. 23. According to at least one policeman, the Jew hunt patrols predominated. Such actions were our main task, and in comparison to real partisan actions, they were much more 24 numerous. With these small patrols hunting down surviving Jews, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 came almost full circle back to the experience at J6ZEF6W. During the large deportation operations, virtually all the policemen had to perform at least cordon duty. They herded masses of people onto the trains, but could distance themselves from the killing at the other end of the trip. Their sense of detachment from the fate of the Jews they deported was unshakable. But the JU hunt was different. Once again they saw their victims face to face, and the killing was personal. More important, each individual policeman once again had a considerable degree of choice. How each exercised that choice revealed the extent to which the battalion had divided into the tough and the weak. In the months since J6ZEF6W, many had become numbed indifferent, and in some cases eager killers. Others limited their participation in the killing process, refraining when they could do so without great cost or inconvenience. Only a minority of nonconformists managed to preserve a beleaguered sphere of moral autonomy that emboldened them to employ patterns of behavior and stratagems of evasion that kept them from becoming killers at all. Concerning the eager killers, the wife of Lieutenant Brand remembered vividly one event during a visit to her husband in Poland. I was sitting at breakfast one morning with my husband in the garden of our lodgings when an ordinary policeman of my husband's platoon came up to us, stood stiffly at attention, and declared, "Herr Lieutenant, I have not yet had breakfast." When my husband looked at him quizzically, he declared further, "I have not yet killed any Jews." It all sounded so cynical that I indignantly reprimanded the man with harsh words, and called him, if I remember correctly, a scoundrel. My husband sent the policeman away, and then reproached me, and told me that I'd get myself in deep trouble, talking that way. Growing callousness can also be seen in the post-shooting behavior of the policemen. After J6ZEF6W and the early shootings, the men had returned to their quarters, shaken and embittered, without appetite or desire to talk about what they had just done. With the relentless killing, such sensitivities were dulled. One policeman recalled, at the lunch table some of the comrades made jokes about the experiences they'd had during an action. From their stories I could gather that they had just finished a shooting action. I remember as especially crass that one of the men said, "Now we eat the brains of slaughtered Jews." 26. Only the witness found this joke less than hilarious. In such an atmosphere it was quite easy for the officers and NCOs to form a Jew hunt patrol or firing squad, simply by asking for volunteers. Most emphatic in this regard was Adolf Bittner. Above all, I must categorically say that for the execution commandos, basically enough volunteers responded to the request of the officer in charge. I must add further that often there were so many volunteers that some of them had to be turned away. 27 others were less categorical, noting that in addition to asking for volunteers, sometimes officers, or NCOs, picked from among those standing nearby, usually men whom they knew to be willing shooters. As Sergeant Beckemeyer put it, in summary, one could perhaps say that in small actions, when not so many shooters were needed, there were always enough volunteers available. In larger actions, when a great many shooters were needed, there were also many volunteers, but if this did not suffice, others were also assigned. 28 Like Beckemeyer, Walter Zimmerman also made a distinction between the large and small executions. Concerning the latter, he noted, "In no case can I remember that anyone was forced to continue participating in the executions when he declared that he was no longer able to." As far as group and platoon actions were concerned, here I must honestly admit that with these smaller executions, there were always some comrades who found it easier to shoot Jews than did others, so that the respective commando leaders never had difficulty finding suitable shoot 29ers. Those who did not want to go on the Jew hunts or participate in firing squads followed 3 lines of action. They made no secret of their antipathy to the killing, they never volunteered, and they kept their distance from the officers and NCOs when Jew hunt patrols and firing squads were being formed. Some were never chosen simply because their attitude was well known. Otto Julius Skimke, the first man to step out at JDZEF 6W, was frequently assigned to partisan actions but never to a Jew hunt. "It is not to be excluded," he said, "that because of this incident I was freed from other Jewish actions." 30 Adolf Bittner likewise credited his early and open opposition to the battalion's Jewish actions with sparing him from further involvement. "I must emphasize that from the first days I left no doubt among my comrades that I disapproved of these measures and never volunteered for them." Thus, on one of the first searches for Jews, one of my comrades clubbed a Jewish woman in my presence, and I hit him in the face. A report was made, and in that way my attitude became known to my superiors. I was never officially punished, but anyone who knows how the system works knows that outside official punishment there is the possibility for chicanery that more than makes up for punishment. Thus I was assigned Sunday duties and special watches 31, but Bittner was never assigned to a firing squad. Gustav Michelson who had lingered among the trucks at J6ZEF 6W despite his comrades' taunts, also gained a certain immunity due to his reputation. About the frequent Jew hunts, Michelson recalled, "No one ever approached me concerning these operations. For these actions the officers took men with them, and in their eyes I was no man." Other comrades who displayed my attitude and my behavior were also spared from such actions. 32 The tactic of keeping one's distance was invoked by Heinrich Voigt to explain how he avoided shooting on all but one occasion. One always had a certain freedom of movement of a few meters, and from experience I noticed very quickly that the platoon leader almost always chose the people standing next to him. I thus always attempted to take a position as far as possible from the center of events. 33 Others likewise sought to avoid shooting by staying in the background. 34 Sometimes distance and reputation did not suffice, and outright refusal was required to avoid killing. In 2nd Platoon of 3rd Company, Lieutenant Hoppner became one of the most zealous practitioners of the Jew hunt and eventually tried to impose the policy that everyone had to shoot. Some men who had never shot before then killed their first Jews. 35 But Arthur Rohrbaugh could not shoot defenseless people. It was also known to Lieutenant Hoppner that I could not do it. He had already told me on earlier occasions that I must become tougher. In this sense he once said that I too would yet learn the next shot. On patrol in the woods with Corporal Hayden and 5 other policemen, Rohrbaugh encountered 3 Jewish women and a child. Hayden ordered his men to shoot the Jews, but Rohrbaugh simply walked away. Hayden grabbed his gun and shot the Jews himself. Rohrbaugh credited Trapp for his suffering no negative consequences. On account of the old man, I think I had no trouble. 36 Others were more cautious and refrained from shooting only when no officer was present, and they were among trusted comrades who shared their views. As Martin Ditmold recalled, in small actions, it often occurred that Jews whom we had picked up were let go again. That happened when one was sure that no superior could learn anything of it. Over time one learned how to evaluate one's comrades, and if one could risk not shooting captured Jews contrary to standing orders, but rather letting them go. 37 The battalion communications staff also claimed that they ignored Jews they encountered in the countryside when they were laying lines on their own. 38 When shooting at a distance, rather than giving a neck shot, at least one policeman are merely fired into the air. 39 How many hundreds of Jews, indeed probably thousands vertical bar, did Reserve Police Battalion 101 shoot in the course of the Jew hunt? No reports of such figures survive for this unit. However, we can get a sense of how important a component the Jew hunt was in the final solution from surviving reports of 3 other I units operating in Poland. From May to October 1943, long after the vast bulk of the Jews who had fled from the ghetto roundups and attempted to hide had already been tracked down and shot, the commander of the border police for the Lublin district Gdo, these figures would therefore include the contributions of Reserve Police Vertical Bar Battalion 101, reported to his superior in Krakow Gdo, the monthly body count of Jews shot by his men. For this 6-month period, long past the killing peak in the Lublin district, the total was 1,695, or an average of nearly 283 per month. 2 months were particularly prominent. August, when another large forest sweep was carried out, and October, when the escapees from the SOBIB 6R death camp breakout were tracked down. 40 More indicative of the killing rate for the Jew hunt during die peak period are the reports of the Gendarmerie Platoon of Warsaw. This unit of only 80 men, responsible for patrolling the greater than nearby towns and countryside surrounding the city, was led by I Lieutenant Liebscher, a notoriously energetic and eager partic. Upon in the final solution. His daily reports from March 26 to September 21, 1943, reflect a total of 1,094 Jews killed by his unit, for an average of nearly 14 Jews per policeman. The peak months, not unexpectedly, were April and May, when Jews were desperately seeking to escape the final liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, and had to pass through Liebscher's territory. Liebscher's reports contained detailed descriptions of a variety of daily incidents. They closed with the heading "Proceeded according to existing guidelines," followed simply by a date, place and number of Jews, male and female. In the end, even the heading was dropped as superfluous, and only the date, place, and number of Jewish men and women were listed, without further explanation. 41 Perhaps most relevant and most closely parallel to the situation of Reserve Police Battalion 101 was that of a company of Reserve Police Battalion 133 stationed in Rawa in the neighboring district of Galicia, to the east of Lublin. According to 6 weekly reports, for the period November 1 to December 12, 1942, this company executed 481 Jews who had either evaded deportation by hiding or jumped from trains on the way to Betzek. For this brief 6-week period, therefore, the company on average killed nearly 3 Jews per policeman in an area that had already been cleared by deportation and was being kept Juden for by the Jew hunt. 42 Though the Jew hunt has received little attention, it was an important and statistically significant phase of the final solution. A not inconsiderable percentage of Jewish victims in the general government lost their lives in this way. Statistics aside, the Jew hunt is a psychologically important key to the mentality of the perpetrators. Many of the German occupiers in Poland may have witnessed or participated in ghetto roundups on several occasions in a lifetime, a few brief moments that could be easily repressed. But the Jew hunt was not a brief episode. It was a tenacious, remorseless ongoing campaign, in which the hunters tracked down and killed their prey in direct and personal confrontation. It was not a passing phase, but an existential condition of constant readiness and intention to kill every last Jew who could be found. The Last Massacres. Harvest Festival. On October 28, 1942, the HSSPF, for the General Gouverneur Wilhelm Kruger, decreed that 8 Jewish ghettos could remain in the district of Lublin. 1/4 of the 8 sites were within the security zone of Reserve Police Battalion 101. LUK 6W, Smijierzyk Perciu, and Konskola. In fact, only the first two Karat remained as Jewish ghettos, after the fall deportations, along with Piaski, Izbica, and Wofodawu elsewhere in the Lublin district, Efla faced with the constant threat of death by starvation and exposure on the one hand, or betrayal and shooting on the other. Many Jews, who had fled to the forests during the deportations in October and November, subsequently returned to the reinstated ghettos of Luk6W and Mijayerzyk. The winter weather made life in the forests increasingly difficult and precarious. Any movement in the snow left tracks, and on at least one occasion frozen feces gave away a Jewish hiding place carved out within a haystack. Thus, when it appeared that the deportations had come to an end, many Jews calculated that they stood a much better chance of survival within one of the permitted ghettos than as hunted prey in the forests. In fact, the deportations from the county of Radzin had ended for the moment, but life in the ghettos of Lukwa and Mijayerzyk was not without continuing danger. In Luka, the SS ghetto administrator, Joseph Berger, had 500 to 600 Jews shot in December to reduce the ghetto population. 3 in Mijayerzyk, 500 Jewish workers in the brush factory, who had been spared the fell deportation, were deported to the work camp at Troniki on December 30, 1942. For the following night, around 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve, security police from neighboring Biahi Podlaska showed up at the Mijayerzyk ghetto in an inebriated condition and began shooting the remaining Jews for sport until the Radzin security police arrived and chased them away. 5 After 4 months of relative calm, the end came. On the night of May 1st, the men of 2nd Company surrounded the ghetto in Mijayerzyk, where they had carried out so many deportations the previous fall. Joined once again by a unit from Troniki, they closed in on the ghetto in the morning and assembled the Jews in the marketplace. The policemen estimated the number of deportees in this action at 700 to 1,000, though one admitted it was said to have been as high as 3,000. 1 Jewish witness estimated 4,000 to 5,007. Once again, the Jews were thoroughly searched and dispossessed in nades and dressing barracks, and then stuffed into train cars so tightly that the doors would barely close. Some were sent to the Majdanek labor camp in Lublin, but most were deported to the gas chambers of Treblinka to conclude the so-called 5th action in Mijayerzyk. The 6th action occurred on May 26, when another 1,000 Jews were sent to the Majdanek Camp 9. At that point only 200 Jews remained. Some escaped, but the last 170 were shot by the security police on July 17, 1943, in the 7th and final action, after which MIDZYRZEC was proclaimed Judenfrei. On May 2, simultaneously with the renewed deportations from MIDZYRZEC by NADE's 2nd Company SS units from Lublin, along with Ukrainian auxiliaries from Troniki, liquidated the ghetto in Luk6W, deporting an additional 3,000 to 4,000 Jews to Treblinka. Many of the men who had come to Poland with Reserve Police Battalion 101 in June 1942 were gradually reassigned to new tasks. During the winter of 1942-43, the older men, those born before 1898, were sent back to Germany. 11 At the same time, vertical bar men were culled from each platoon of the battalion and assembled in a special unit under Lieutenant Brand. They were sent back to Zamość in the southern part of the district to take part in the expulsion of Poles from villages as part of Himmler's and Globoknik's plan for a pure German settlement area deep in Poland. 12 In early 1943, a group of younger non-commissioned officers from the battalion was reassigned to the Waffen-SS and sent to specialized training. 13 Somewhat later, Lieutenant Nade was transferred to Lublin to form a special guard company. He took Sergeant Steinmetz as his deputy. 14 Nade returned briefly to Mijayerzyk to conduct the May deportations, however. Finally, Lieutenant Scheer was also reassigned to Lublin to take command of one of 2 special pursuit platoons, Jagduj, especially formed to intensify the hunt for partisan bands. Some reinforcements were received to fill the void, especially a group of Berliners, to help fill out depleted 2nd Company 15, but, for the most part, Reserve Police Battalion 101 remained under strength. Because of the high rate of turnover and reassignment, only a portion of the policemen who had taken part in the first massacre at Defo were still with the battalion. In November 1943, when its participation in the final solution culminated in the Great Harvest Festival, Erntefest massacre, the single largest German killing operation against Jews in the entire war. With a victim total of 42,000 Jews in the Lublin district, Erntefest surpassed even the notorious Babi Yar massacre of more than 33,000 Jews. Outside Kiev, it was exceeded only by the Romanian massacre of more than 50,000 SN Jews in October 1941. Erntefest was the culmination of Himmler's crusade to destroy Polish Jewry. As the murder campaign gained momentum, in 1942, Himmler had been plagued with complaints from industrial and military authorities about the removal of Jewish workers, essential to the war effort. In response to such complaints, which he viewed as pure pretense, he agreed to spare some Jewish workers, on the condition that they were lodged in camps and ghettos entirely under SS control. This allowed Himmler to parry pragmatic arguments based on the necessities of the war economy, while ensuring his ultimate control over the fate of all Jews. For in the end, the sanctuary of the labor camps and work ghettos was only temporary. As Himmler said there too, the Jews shall likewise one day disappear in accordance with the wish of the Führer. 16 in the Lublin district, work ghettos in Mijierzyk, LUK6W, Pieski Izbika, and Włodawa had been allowed to continue in existence through the winter of 1942-43. The latter three ghettos were eliminated in March and April 1943. As we have seen, Mijierzyk and LUK6W suffered a similar fate in May. 17 thereafter. The only Jews in the Lublin district left alive by German consent were some 45,000 workers in the labor camp empire of Odilo-Globoknik. These included a few survivors of the Lublin ghettos, as well as workers sent from the liquidated ghettos of Warsaw and Białystok. By the fall of 1943, two things were apparent to Himmler. First, the work Jews in the camps would have to be killed if his mission were to be completed. Second, over the past 6 months Jewish resistance had arisen in Warsaw April, Treblinka July, Białystok August, and SOBIB 6R October, when the Jews in those places saw no further hope of survival. Until the spring of 1943, the Jews of Poland had clung to the all too understandable, but mistaken assumption that even the Nazis could not be so irrational, by utilitarian standards, as to kill work Jews, making essential contributions to the German war economy. They had therefore pursued the desperate strategy of salvation through labor, as the only hope that a remnant of Jews would survive. This strategy and hope were the crucial preconditions for continuing Jewish compliance. But the Jews were gradually being stripped of their illusions. The Germans encountered resistance when they tried to carry out the final liquidation of the Warsaw and Białystok ghettos, and revolts broke out in the death camps of Treblinka and SOBIB 6R when the work Jews there realized that the camps were about to be closed. Himmler could not expect to liquidate the Lublin work camps gradually or one by one without encountering further Jewish resistance born of desperation. The inmates of the Lublin labor camps would therefore have to be killed in a single massive operation that would catch them by surprise. Such was the genesis of Erntefest. 1 mass killing on such a scale required planning and preparation. Globoknik's recent successor as SSPF, Jakob Sporenberg, traveled to Krakow, where he consulted with his superior, Wilhelm Kruger. He returned with a special folder and began issuing instructions. 19 in late October, Jewish prisoners were put to work digging trenches just outside the camps at Majdanek Troniki and Poniatowa. Though the trenches were 3 meters deep and 1.5 to 3 meters wide, the fact that they were dug in a zigzag pattern gave credence to the claim that they were intended as protection against air raids. 20 mobilization of SS and police units from all over the general government then began. On the evening of November 2nd, Sporenberg met with the commanders of the various forces, which included Waffen-SS units from the districts of KRAK-6W and Warsaw, Police Regiment 22 from KRAK-6W, Lublin's own Police Regiment 25 including Reserve Police Battalion 101, and the Lublin Security Police, as well as the commanders of the camps at Majdanek Troniki and Poniatowa and Sporenberg's SSPF staff. The meeting room was full. Sporenberg gave instructions from the special folder he had brought back from Krakow 21. The massive killing operation began the next morning. Members of Reserve Police Battalion 101 participated in virtually every phase of the Ernstfest massacre in Lublin. They arrived in the district capital on November 2nd. Sotrap presumably attended Sporenberg's conference and were lodged overnight. Early on the morning of November 3rd, they took up their stations. One group from the battalion helped to march Jews from various small work camps around Lublin to the Majdanek concentration camp several kilometers from the city center on the main road leading southeast. 22 The largest contingent of Reserve Police Battalion 101 took up positions 5 meters apart on both sides of the angled street that led from the main highway past the commandant's house to the entrance of the inner camp. Here they watched as an endless stream of Jews from various work sites in Lublin filed past 23 women guards on bicycles escorted 5,000 to 6,000 women prisoners from the old airport camp where they had been employed sorting the warehouses of clothing collected at the death camps. Another 8,000 male Jews were also marched past in the course of the day. Together with the 3,500 to 4,000 Jews already in the camp, they swelled the victim pool to some 16,500 to 18,000. 24 As the Jews passed between the chain of reserve policemen into the camp, music blared from 2 loudspeaker trucks. Despite the attempt to drown out other noise, the sound of steady gunfire could be heard from the camp. 25 The Jews were taken to the last row of barracks, where they undressed. Arms raised, hands clasped behind their necks, totally naked, they were led in groups from the barracks through a hole cut in the fence to the trenches that had been dug behind the camp. This route too was guarded by men from Reserve Police Battalion 10126, stationed only 10 meters from the graves. Heinrich Bockhold * 1st Company witnessed the killing procedure. From my position I could now observe how the Jews were driven naked from the barracks by other members of our battalion, the shooters of the execution commandos who sat on the edge of the graves. Directly in front of me were members of the SD. Some distance behind each shooter stood several other SD men, who constantly kept the magazines of the submachine guns full and handed them to the shooter. A number of such shooters were assigned to each grave. Today I can no longer provide details about the number of graves. It is possible that there were many such graves where shooting took place simultaneously. I definitely remember that the naked Jews were driven directly into the graves and forced to lie down quite precisely on top of those who had been shot before them. The shooter then fired off a burst at these prone victims. How long the action lasted, I can no longer say with certainty. Presumably it lasted the entire day, because I remember that I was relieved once from my post. I can give no details about the number of victims, but there were an awful lot of them. 27 Observing the killing from a greater distance was SSPF Sporenberg, who circled above the camp in a Fieseler Stork airplane. Poles watched from the rooftops. 28 On the same day, and in the same way, other German units massacred the Jewish prisoners at the Troniki work camp 40 kilometers to the east of Lublin. Estimates vary from 6,000 to 10,000 victims, and several smaller camps. Still alive were 14,000 Jews at Poniatowa, 50 kilometers west of Lublin, and 3,000 Jews at camps in Bajzin and Krasnik. The last two were to be spared. Bajzin was producing for the Heinkel Aircraft Company, and Krasnik for the personal needs of the SSPF Lublin. But the big labor camp at Poniatowa had not been liquidated on November 3rd simply because the Germans lacked manpower. However, the camp had been sealed, and telephone lines cut so that the events at Majdanek and Troniki could give no forewarning of what was to happen the following day, November 4th. Here too surprise was to be total. In the memories of many of the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101, the two massacres in the two camps merged into a single operation of 2 to 3 days at a single camp, either Majdanek or Poniatowa. But some witnesses, and at least one from each of the companies, did in fact remember shooting operations at 2 camps. 29. It seems clear, therefore, that early on the morning of November 4th, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 traveled the 50 kilometers west from Lublin to Poniatowa. This time the battalion was not dispersed. The men were stationed either between the undressing barracks and the ZIKRAG graves of the shooting site or at the shooting site itself. 30. They formed the human cordon, through which the 14,000 work Jews of Poniatowa, stark naked and hands behind their necks, marched to their deaths, while the loudspeakers once again blared music, in a vain attempt to cover up the noise of the shooting. The closest witness was Martin Dittmold. I myself, and my group had guard duty, directly in front of the grave. The grave was a big zigzag-shaped series of slit trenches, about 3 meters wide and 3 to 4 meters deep. From my post I could observe how the Jews were forced to undress in the last barracks and surrender all their possessions, and were then driven through our cordon and down slipped openings into the trenches. SD men standing at the edge of the trenches drove the Jews onward to the execution sites, where other SD men with